And welcome back to the Cooler Jets podcast for Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Michael, it is officially draft week. We could not be more excited, but there's one question on everybody's mind. Will Deebo Samuel be a New York Jet by Thursday night?
It's tough. I mean, I don't want to be too biased or too optimistic, but reading the signs that are out there, it does feel like there is a decent chance that it could come into fruition. I mean, I just want it to all be over. It's what I want. I want to be able to stop having to read all these signals on Twitter, check what people are liking, what they're posting on Instagram, all this stuff, because it's been tiring. And it's really been, ever since the Tyreek Hill saga, just kind of constantly looking for who's that next guy that we're going to go after. And it finally seems like there is a realistic possibility with Deebo Samuel. So we'll see if it plays out. I'm optimistic, but we've had our hopes dashed plenty of times this offseason, so I don't want to get my hopes too high again, but I do think there is a decent chance that this does work out for the Jets.
Yeah, and it's possible by the time you're listening to this episode, maybe he will be a New York Jet. Maybe he'll be a member of another team. If that's the case, skip ahead like 15 minutes because the majority of this episode, we're going to try to focus on the draft that's coming up. If he does happen to get traded to the Jets, obviously we'll do an emergency podcast to break it all down. But today, Michael, we want to focus on the draft, but I think it's hard to talk about the draft without addressing the situation because, like you said, they were so in it on Tyreek Hill. If you read the tea leaves, it seems like the Jets have been desperately wanting to trade for a veteran wide receiver. There's all the connections with Saleh and LaFleur. It just makes all the sense in the world. And the fact that the Niners did a very similar trade a few years ago with DeForest Buckner to the Indianapolis Colts. I think it was the 11th pick. Very similar value. They could trade Deebo Samuel. They could be in the prime position to replace him with the rookie. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense from all sides, especially since Deebo has requested a trade. And it really sounds like he has no intention of being a San Francisco 49er. And if it was any other offseason, maybe I would say, well, they'll hold on to him. They still have 3 more years of contractual control with the franchise tags. But we've learned this offseason that star players seem to be getting their way and to not really trust anything. So it's a complicated situation. I guess I'll start with this. What would Deebo Samuel bring to the Jets? That's a very generic question, but it seems like the root of their issues seems to be maybe his usage in San Francisco. And we know the Jets run a similar, not an identical offense to San Francisco, but does it make sense for the Jets' perspective to bring him in if his big argument is against his usage in San Francisco?
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I, before we started recording, were doing some of our Deebo research. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions with the, sort of Deebo discourse, especially among Jets fans, is this notion that he wasn't productive before they started using him at running back in the middle of the season. That's just completely false. I mean, obviously that worked great for him and he's great in that role, but the first 9 weeks of the season, when he basically was never playing running back, maybe a snap here or there, I think he only had 6 carries the first 9 weeks of the season. He was averaging 110 receiving yards a game. He was second in the league behind Cooper Kupp over that span. So, and then even before the season, that's another misconception, is that he's a one-year wonder. His previous 17 games before this year, he had over 1,300 total yards, 1,100 receiving, about 200 rushing. So this is a guy who's been a great player really since he stepped foot into the league in 2019. Injuries are the obvious concern, but he's a fit in this offense. He's effective even without, bringing that unique element of being a running back lining up in the backfield. Obviously, he's still going to get plenty of design touches, whether it's screens, end arounds, and you can give him a couple running back carries, maybe 1 or 2 a game. But he doesn't have to be doing what he was doing in the playoffs last year, like 10 carries a game to be effective. That made him unique, but it's not necessarily something he needs to be effective. His overall production didn't change that much when they started doing it. You could, give him the same sort of touches by throwing him the ball. It's not necessarily something he needs. So he'd be the number 1 receiver that I think they'd be looking for, that they have been looking for this offseason. Obviously, a more unconventional style of that player. But ultimately, the production is still there. He's going to be able to create offense for you on his own. Both with schemed up plays and just getting more after the catch on whether it's a slant or a dig or a crossing route than most players in that situation would get. So he's a complete package. I don't really see any on-field concerns with him. It's just the injuries. And obviously, of course, what do you give up for him? What do you pay for him? But on field, this guy is a top 5 to 10 playmaker in the game, top 5-10 receiver in the game, and it would be tremendously exciting. I mean, do you have any concerns with him? We know the injuries on the field. Is there anything that gives you pause with him?
Not really. I mean, I guess, a guy like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown might bring you something else that the Jets don't already have. And that's not to say the Jets can replicate what Deebo Samuel brings, but they do already have, smaller receivers, yak guys. And you do have to wonder, well, how much is Deebo a product of Kyle Shanahan? I don't think he's a complete product. Like you said, I mean, he is a unique player in this league. And I think you can put him on most teams and you're going to find if you get the ball in his hands, you're going to have success. So I don't really have many on-field concerns for him. I think the only concern is especially when you're in the position the Jets are at, which look, they're not going to be competing for a Super Bowl this year, to go ahead and trade multiple picks and pay a premium salary for any player, not just Deebo Samuel, but especially a guy with his style of play. Injuries are a factor. He's been injured before. And it's like, if you sacrifice all of that for a top flight weapon and then he gets hurt, obviously you can't prepare for that. That risk comes with anybody they would select with any of the draft picks that they'd be giving up. But it's, it is something to consider with his play style. Does he have a shorter shelf life because his play style relies so much on yards after contact? But no, I mean, I think Joe Douglas will be full steam ahead and be aggressive in getting him. Do you think that, Joe Douglas had an interesting quote talking about the Tyreek Hill trade, and they huddle afterwards. They discuss, what could they have done better? How could they have been more aggressive? And I think that signals to me, and the 49ers have been very vocal about, they're not going to trade him unless they get a king's ransom, is I guess the report that's come out. It seems like the teams that the Jets are going to be competing against for Deebo Samuel will probably offer their late ones. The Jets could offer what they offered for Tyreek Hill, which is probably what they'll start with since that was publicized and everybody knows about it, which was 35 and 38. They're 2 second rounders. And then this is the part I actually forgot is they were going to swap thirds. So the Jets are going to give up pick 69 and the Chiefs are going to send back 103. So it was 2 seconds, swap thirds, and you get a receiver. But I don't know if the Niners would do that. I mean, maybe they would, but it sounds like they want a first-round pick. It sounds to me like if the Jets would offer pick 10 and Deebo really has no intent of playing with San Francisco 49ers, he's a Jet. Do you think the Jets will do that, or do you think Joe Douglas will desperately try to hold on to pick number 10, which, it should be noted, was expected to be used on a receiver? Not that was a guarantee, but a lot of people were talking about pick 10 as a receiver pick.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the big question. Just reading the tea leaves and what's been out there, it does seem like 10 can get it done. And it doesn't seem like the biggest package, but the value of that pick alone, at least based on the trade charts that are out there, it's more than the Tyreek Hill package, and it's more than any trade package we've seen for a wide receiver in the past few years. Adams, Diggs, the Hill trade that did happen, Odell, all those, just the 10th pick alone is more than that. And I agree. I think that's what the Niners will want because it gives them the opportunity to draft his replacement right away. Whereas with the later picks, it's a great package. It's a great haul, but they're going to want to fill that hole and compete and help Trey Lance get off the ground this season. So I think that's what it will take. It could even be a little bit more than that. But if Deebo really is, if he really wants out, then maybe the Niners don't have as much leverage to be picky, and just 10 straight up will get it done. So I think those are the big questions. Do the Jets want to part with 10, and will it take a little bit more than that? I do think they would give up 10 because, like you said, it seems like they are planning to take a receiver at that pick anyway. And the quotes that Joe Douglas has been putting out the past week have really, he has not been shooting down these discussions. He's been openly sort of inviting this discussion about the Tyreek Hill trade, about being aggressive in these potential deals. It does seem like that he kind of is feeling that pressure to maybe be a little bit more aggressive than he would typically be to make a move like this, to get a big time offensive player to help Zach Wilson and to help this team win some games because, his job is fairly safe. I don't really see a scenario where he's out after this year, but they have 6 wins in his 2 years here, and the pressure will come sooner rather than later when you're winning that few games. So I do think there are signs that he's going to be willing to get aggressive if that's what needs to be done for this trade to happen. So I can very much see a Jets trade for Deebo, 10 for him straight up happening within the next few days. If I honestly had to predict, I do think that's what will happen. I'm not confident it will, but I do think that's the most likely scenario, just kind of reading everything that's happening.
Yeah, and in some ways, you'd almost prefer to give up 10 than 35, 38 and swapping thirds. And I know that might sound crazy, but I think in this draft class, and look, I mean, you could go either way, but in this draft class, day two is really where the meat of this class is. And I don't think there's a huge difference from 10 to 35. The player that you're going to get, it's not as big of a difference as it has been in years past. I mean, this is a very deep class, but it's not a very top heavy class. I think the reason you might want to hold on to 10 is not necessarily for the player that you would take at 10, but maybe for the trade down opportunities. You could potentially trade Deebo for 35 and 38, and then maybe you could trade down from 10 and recuperate a day two pick. And maybe you pick up a first for next year, which will probably be a better class. I think that would be the only reason you would try to really hang on to 10. But outside of that, it's like, look, if you were planning on using 10 on Drake London or Garrett Wilson or Jamison Williams, whatever, it's like you can trade him in for the, guaranteed great player as long as he stays healthy. You keep 35 and 38 and you can go and bolster out the defense, go take a safety, go take a defensive tackle, a linebacker, a corner, or whatever. In some ways, I would almost prefer giving up 10 unless you know that you have a trade down scenario that really could be beneficial for your team. Maybe you fight to just give up those day two picks. And as far as like the on-field stuff, I know you asked me about that and we kind of went off in a different way. It's like, to me, I think Deebo Samuel is so unique that you're still going to want to use him as a unicorn. You're still going to want to give him jet sweeps and wide receiver screens and stuff. But yeah, putting him in the backfield, running him between the tackles, I can understand why Deebo is not going to want to do that 10 times a game for 17 games and maybe even playoffs. The Jets have Braxton Berrios. That's an all-pro kick returner. They can give him some of those running back reps. Deebo's not going to necessarily have to do that. And the Jets also, they signed two big tight ends that can be maybe more of those jump ball, those big bodied targets for Zach Wilson. Because that would be maybe my only concern. And one of the reasons that I have started to come around on Drake London is, maybe he's not the prototypical archetype you think of when you think of this LaFleur offense. It seems like if you're just going to judge it from Shanahan, they want speed at receiver. And then, the tight end can bring you your physicality. But the one thing about Drake London is, if you watch any of Zach Wilson's college film, how he loved his receivers at BYU, specifically Dax Milne, and the ability to just put it up at the top shelf, let Milne go up and get it. And you're not going to find many players that are going to come out in any of these next few drafts that are as good at that as Drake London. And not just that, because those types of players, a lot of times, like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside's a good example a few years ago. A lot of times those jump ball guys don't necessarily always translate to the NFL. For me, there's two reasons why I'm more confident in Drake London. Is one, our good buddy Joe Blewett, who knows a hell of a lot more about route running than anybody else on Twitter, really believes in Drake London's ability as a route runner. Really says that, look, this guy is a much better route runner than he's being given credit for. That's one. But the other thing is his yards after catch, his yak ability. Drake London is second to none, in my opinion, in this draft class. Sure, you can find the speedier guys, but when you look at Drake London's ability to just take a 10-yard hitch and get 25 yards, breaking 4 tackles by the DBs. I mean, that's invaluable in this offense. And I think the Jets could have a lot of fun with that. And if Zach Wilson was going to choose any of these rookie receivers, I think he might choose Drake London. So if you bring in Deebo, you're obviously going to sacrifice that. And that puts more of an emphasis on Uzomah and Conklin being your big body targets. Because if the Jets are trotting out Deebo, Elijah Moore, and Corey Davis or whatever, they don't necessarily have the biggest receivers in the world. And I think you saw at times Zach Wilson kind of struggle. He's a smaller quarterback. When you have a guy like a big quarterback like Josh Allen, having small receivers isn't the end of the world. But when you have a smaller quarterback like Zach Wilson, giving him a big body guy outside isn't the end of the world. But as long as Uzomah and specifically Tyler Conklin, who really displayed his ability to go up and get those vertical balls on the field and getting them involved for Zach, I don't think it's an issue. But getting the certified stud in Deebo Samuel, I think is worth it. And this is why you have a rookie on a rookie contract. You've saved this money for this exact situation. And right. Whoever they pay at 10, I forget exactly who tweeted this out, but whoever they pay at 10, isn't the goal to inevitably eventually be able to pay them in 5 years? And in that scenario, in 5 years from now, you're going to be paying Zach Wilson already. So you can go ahead and bring in a guy like Deebo while Zach is still in his rookie contract for the next 3 or 4 years. And he could be huge for Zach Wilson's development. And I think, and lastly, before we we could dive more into this and then we can move on. But the Jets have put a real emphasis on yak this offseason. And I was just talking about that with Drake London, but you see that with Uzomah, is that they felt like, Zach Wilson wasn't getting really any help from his receiver room, not just, drops and miss, bad routes or whatever. But it was like a lot of times last year, you'd see Zach Wilson complete a 15-yard pass, and that was it. Where in other offenses, you'll see a 15-yard pass and a receiver can take it, 20, 30 more yards. And that's what Deebo Samuel is going to bring you. And you pair him with Elijah Moore, and you pair him with this offensive line and these tight ends and Michael Carter, and Zach Wilson can take. He doesn't even have to take a monster leap, even if we just see the growth that we saw at the end of the season. The Zach Wilson we saw against the Bucs and the Jaguars. This is a damn good offense. I mean, is it elite? Maybe not, but this is a top 15 offense in my eyes, and with the ceiling to be even higher. So I'd be all in on this. I think Joe Douglas will be. If you read the tea leaves, it seems like the only thing in my eyes that will hinder this from happening is San Francisco being stubborn and not wanting to move Deebo Samuel, not wanting to give into his trade demands, trying to set a precedent that you can't just whine and get out of town. That would be the only thing that would hold it back. But given that they made a very similar trade 2 years ago with Buckner, given the fact that he seems like he was close with LaFleur, he seemed like he likes Saleh, he wants to be on the East Coast. The Jets have this need. We know they've been aggressive. They have the capital and the money to do so. Just everything is aligning for this to happen. And if you're asking me, to be honest, if Deebo Samuel a Jet by Thursday night, I would say yes. I think he is. But if he's not, I'm still very happy with sitting back and taking a guy like Drake London. It won't be the end of the world for me if the Jets don't get Deebo Samuel. But if I had to put my money on it, I would bet that Deebo Samuel's a Jet by Thursday night.
Yeah, I agree with you. If they don't get him, I'll still feel okay about it because, like you said, I like the options that they have at 10, and they're still in a good spot. But just to close up this topic on him, I think, I understand that some fans are skeptical of the pursuit because of the capital you have to give up, the price you have to pay for him. But like you just explained, this is, the Jets have been preparing for this moment with the assets that they've collected with these trades, trading Darnold, trading Jamal Adams. They can trade the 10th pick. They can trade, that Tyreek Hill package, and they'd still have the 6th most valuable collection of picks in this year's draft based on the cumulative value of all the picks that they have. So they have that comfort to where they can make this sort of aggressive move, and they'll still have a chest of picks that can help them rebuild this roster. And then in terms of the cap space part of it, like you said, and this is a tweet I saw, I forget who tweeted out, but it was a great point, is that basically with this trade, you're accelerating to that goal of what you hope to get out of a player you draft in the first round. You hope that player can be good enough to where in 4 or 5 years, you give them that big extension and they can, push towards, a decade of playing with you. And this is just accelerating to that point. And obviously, best case scenario, would you love to have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, superstar receiver making $6 million a year? Absolutely. You would love to have that, but that's just such a minority outcome for a 10th overall pick, for any first round pick, that it's not something you can bank on. Those guys are like 1 out of 10 outcomes. More than a third of the time you're drafting a complete bust, whether it's Henry Ruggs, Kadarius Toney's going to get traded now, Corey Coleman, Laquan Treadwell, Josh Doxson, N'Keal Harry, Jalen Reagor.
Jets legend Josh Dotson, by the way.
Right. And future, I actually want him a lot in that draft, but that goes to show you, like, as much as you love these prospects right now, you can't really, you have to value history, the brutal honest of history over your, love for them right now.
Yeah, statistically, most of these guys are going to bust.
Exactly. Like, you have to value the pick as what it's most likely going to give you. And there's a small chance it's going to be a home run, but there's a much bigger chance it's going to be a bust. And most likely it's going to be somewhere in the middle, just an average, decent guy like Corey Davis is basically the average expectancy of what you're going to get out of this pick, what he gave the Titans. 3-4 years of, he was pretty good, but you're saving a lot of cap space with that. But isn't cap space there to pay good players? Is that not why you have it? I think Deebo Samuel's pretty good. Last time I checked, he had, including the playoffs, over 2,000 yards last season. I think that's all right. So I would like to pay that sort of player. I don't know. I think for me, I think that's what you save cap space for. What you save these surplus picks for is to make this type of move to add a superstar quarterback supporting player in his prime. So I don't have any reservations about making a big trade offer and giving him, trading all the picks, however, even if it's just a 10th pick. Whatever valuable pick you have to give up to get him. So hopefully this plays out and we have a reaction pod to post in a couple of days.
Yes. I mean, our plan for draft weekend is similar to what we did. I think exactly the same as what we did last year is obviously Thursday night, the draft. We'll record a podcast. It'll come out Friday morning. We'll have, reviewing night one, previewing day two. Same will go for Saturday morning and Sunday morning. And then we'll probably do a mailbag that'll come out Monday. So we'll have 4 straight days of podcasts next week. But hey, if the Jets have make news about Deebo, maybe we'll have, what is that? I mean, including this podcast, that's like 6 podcasts in a span of 7 days. So if the Jets make this trade, you'll have a lot of CYJ coming your way. But just to close this topic out, you mentioned it. The Jets being in this position is a credit to Joe Douglas. This is not luck. All those trades and the amazing value he was getting. Obviously, if the Jets sit back and make those picks, I trust this Jets scouting department. Not all of them are going to hit. That's just a fact. But I trust that they will be able to make, this team a lot better with just the picks. But the fact that they're in the position to trade for proven commodities is a credit to Joe Douglas. And like you said, maybe he doesn't have the wins on his resume the last 2 years after he's cleaning up McCagan's mess and he's dealing with Adam Gase, and it's a new system last year. But I really like the direction that he's put the Jets in. And they're primed to make a move like this. So we'll sit back and see what happens. Hey, maybe it's not Deebo. Maybe they make a move for DK. Maybe they go after AJ Brown. Maybe they don't, and they draft a rookie receiver. And even in that case, I'll still be excited because I think there are still, the harsh reality is a lot of those guys will bust, but they're still going to be, there's going to be a Pro Bowler in this draft at receiver. Well, maybe I shouldn't guarantee that, but there'll be good players at that spot that the Jets can still get. So I'm just really excited for the draft to roll around. I'm honestly kind of sick of talking about it. We have one more episode, Michael, of breaking down all these prospects, and then we're done. Then our next episode will officially be talking about who the Jets drafted. So let's just hop into it. I guess, when the Jaguars get on the clock, and this is really the first year that I can recall where I really have no idea who's going number one. I mean, I think we were probably guessing Hutchinson, but there's some Evan Neal smoke. There's some Trayvon Walker smoke. It could be Ike Mekwonu. Trent Baalke said they're considering 4 players at that spot. I would imagine those are probably the 4 guys that they're considering. And when the Jets are on the clock, I won't be looking at my phone, and maybe I won't for the first 3 picks. I'll just sit back and see Roger Goodell announce the picks with my heart in my throat, hoping that I guess Kayvon's the guy we're all cheering for to fall. Maybe Aiden Hutchinson's the pipe dream. But what is your ideal draft rooting guide for the first 3 picks? When the Jaguars get on the clock, who should Jets fans be hoping they take to produce the best case scenario for pick number 4?
Like you said, it's just this is the most unpredictable top of the draft that I can remember in recent memory. I mean, you mentioned the Trent Baalke saying they have 4 options at the top of that draft. Like, I think most of us are penciling in Hutchinson number 1, but I was looking at some Jaguars fans and what they're talking about just on Twitter and stuff. And Hutchinson is not the consensus for them at all. There's a lot of Neal talk. Ekwonu, Walker is a favorite for them. So it's definitely wide open. So I think in terms of a rooting guide for me, and I think you agree as well, Kayvon is the guy we want at 4.
Right.
So any non-Kayvon pick is going to be getting cheers out of me, hoping he falls down. So to start out, I think a non-Hutchinson pick number 1 would definitely be a good thing because, the next pick is probably going to be Hutchinson to Detroit. Then you just need Kayvon to get past Houston, that's going to be the tough one because do they take him? Do they go with one of the O-linemen, Gardner? But I think number 1, if it's not Hutchinson, I think that's a good start because I think at least then Thibodeaux's getting to 3, and then we just need 1 more. How about you in terms of rooting?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be cheering for an offensive tackle, maybe to go number 1. Evan Neal would probably be the best because he's the one guy out of all those guys you listed that I don't see the Jets taking. I don't see the Jets taking Evan Neal.
Right, and I think another part of that too is that if he goes number 1, I would feel more confident the Texans would take Ekwonu than if it were the other way around. If Ekwonu went 1 and then Neal were still there.
Well, except Laramie Tunsil is maybe more of a left tackle and Evan Neal's more of a right tackle. I mean, I really have no idea what any of these teams are going to do. I have no sense of anything outside of unless you buy the reports that the Lions don't love Kayvon and the fact that the Lions would probably take Hutchinson if he's on the board. Michigan guy, he just seems like I don't see any way Hutchinson gets past 2. But outside of that, I mean, it's like I could see the Lions taking Malik Willis. I could see the Texans taking Sauce Gardner or Ekwonu or Evan Neal or Trayvon Walker. I mean, I could see them taking Thibodeaux. I really have no clue. I guess the best case scenario would be, I'm trying to be realistic. I would say, I guess, yeah, Evan Neal at 1 would be great. Then probably Hutchinson at 2. And then you're sitting pretty. And the scenario that we've been talking a lot about is the potential of the Jets taking an offensive lineman. I mean, at 4, what if the top 3 picks do end up going Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeaux, and then at 3, the Texans take Trayvon Walker. I mean, then you're sitting in a position where you're choosing between Ekwonu or Sauce Gardner. And hell, even if the Texans take, let's say, Sauce Gardner or something, then you're staring at Ekwonu versus Trayvon Walker, which I don't know if the Jets would immediately go with the edge, even though edge is probably a bigger need than offensive tackle. If Ekwonu is a blue chip, Joe Douglas had a lot of interesting quotes this week about potentially taking an offensive tackle, and I think Jets fans should be ready for it. That if Kayvon's on the board, I think he's the pick. I don't buy into the smoke that that he's off the field. He's not a good guy. It seems like the Jets beat reporters have been reporting that the Jets have been pretty, I like Kayvon Thibodeaux a lot. So if he's on the board, I think Kayvon's the pick, unless Hutchinson's on the board. But if he's off the board and the Jets are choosing between Ekwonu and Trayvon Walker and Sauce Gardner, I think there's a good chance the Jets might go Ekwonu. He had that quote where he was quoting his mentor, Ozzie Newsome, where he said, a luxury today might be a need tomorrow. And that, they're always going to keep the mission, their mission, which is focusing on the offensive, defensive lines. If Ekwonu is the number 1 guy on their board, top 3 guy on their board, he's a blue chip player at a super important position on this offensive line. And one that I don't mean to say anything, ideally, I think you might be set with Fant and Becton, but there's a lot of question marks. You're banking on Fant, maintaining his level of play in a season where he had a fairly easy schedule against pass rushers last year. But you're saying that, okay, he's going to maintain at left tackle, that he hit his stride. And even if he plays really well, you're going to have to end up paying him at the end of the year, $16, $17 million if he's going to be your starting left tackle. And then you're banking on Mekhi Becton being healthy, being able to switch to right tackle, and playing good football. I don't mean to say anything. The last time we saw him, he wasn't necessarily playing good football in training camp. Maybe that was overblown. Maybe he was just going against Carl Lawson. But I think we've learned that, as with the Denzel Mims situation, we shouldn't just completely shrug off everything that happens in training camp. He wasn't having a great camp. He showed up overweight. He battled injuries the entire year. It's unfortunate. I'm not writing Mekhi Becton off at all. I think if you take Ekwonu, your dream scenario is that you can have Ekwonu and Mekhi Becton as your offensive tackles. Because if your mission statement is the trenches and you're also trying to protect the quarterback, I mean, that's one hell of a way to do it. If those 2 guys can stay healthy and dominate your run game, first of all, the Jets would have arguably the best offensive line in the league. Your run game is going to dominate. Zach Wilson is going to have all day in the pocket like he did at BYU. I mean, there's a lot of positives about Ekwonu, but Michael, I know you're not a fan necessarily of taking Ike Ekwonu. You might love the player, but I know in that situation, maybe you'd prefer Trayvon Walker or Sauce Gardner. I guess just walk us through your thought process if the Jets face a board that is choosing between Ekwonu and Walker or Ekwonu and Sauce or all 3 of them. That Kayvon is off the board. What's your thought process, and what do you think Joe Douglas' thought process will be?
Well, firstly, just to focus on Ekwonu in the tackle position. So, like you said, I'm not a huge fan of it. I think I've talked about it on here plenty. But you've sort of pulled me to the dark side a little bit to where I will accept it and understand it. But just to play the devil's advocate and explain sort of why I'm not a huge fan of it. I think for me, it's just with the 4th pick, I really want, and maybe it probably sounds a little short-sighted, but I want to be able to have that player with a pick that high have a clear path to, this is what your role is. You can come in and help us right now. Like, you have your role and you just got to play your way into keeping it long term. Whereas with this, there's a lot of gymnastics and, you're playing them, playing the gymnastics with good players with Becton and George Fant, guys who, if healthy, if they can maintain the performance, whatever questions they both have to answer, have proven they can both be very high level tackles. So it's not like the position is a weakness right now. And again, I get everything you're saying, all those concerns. That's why I can't accept it with Ekwonu, who's a great prospect, who I'm a big fan of. The talent at number 4 for Ekwonu, the value's there. So I'm just not the hugest fan of the position need. It would also be the 3rd year in a row picking an O-lineman top 15. And they haven't taken a defensive player in the 1st round since 2019, haven't taken one in the 2nd round since 2017. So there hasn't been a lot of defensive attention. They really need that. So I wouldn't love that as well. ignoring another potential defensive pick. So there are some concerns I have. And I am concerned about, what if that scenario happens where Fant plays great, Becton plays great, they're healthy. Now you got both these guys, and like, do you want to take that risk of trade one of them and force Aquanu in there? So there are some things I'm concerned about, but I do absolutely understand that, forward-looking approach of let's plan ahead, let's be real, and kind of anticipate that one of these two players are not going to work out, and let's be ready for that scenario with a great prospect. So I do understand it, although I would prefer to go in, I think, either the Sauce Gardner or Trayvon Walker direction. If Kayvon isn't there, I think I'd prefer Gardner over Walker, just because I think the talent gap is too big. I think Gardner is, he's as clean as a cornerback prospect can come, with the technique and the fundamentals, the length, the speed, the production. It's all there. So I think he's too far ahead of Walker for me overall to take Walker over him. But with the positional value of edge and his ceiling with his athleticism, and go watch his tape, go watch Joe Blewett's film breakdown. That's what swayed me, because you guys know I'm a stats person. So with his poor win rate and pressure rate, very few sacks, all those things, I should not like him, but I do, because when you turn on his film, you can see the potential and how good he can be. And you can also see the floor, to where this guy is not going to be a bad player. He can run stunts very effectively, is a good run defender. And at the worst, he's so athletic and so powerful, and does have decent pad level, to where he's going to bull rush some guys and create havoc that way. It's just, can he develop the moves and the finesse moves and the technique and the pass rush plan to be a superstar? So I'm a pretty big fan of Walker. I'd like Gardner more, to where I'd prefer him despite the positional value. But I would prefer, my order would be, if Kayvon isn't there, 1 Gardner, 2 Walker, 3 Aquanu. But those are the 3 picks I'd accept. Anything else, specifically Jermaine Johnson, at least among guys who are in the mix, I wouldn't be a huge fan of. But those 3 picks I can absolutely get on board with. And I'd be very excited with Gardner specifically.
Yeah, I was looking back at our podcast from last year, and I think the thing, post-draft, and I think the thing we kept reiterating is, we really need to remember this for next year, referring to this year, is that they don't draft for need. NFL teams rarely draft for need. They look at the positions that they value, and they're going to go with the best player available. And if Aquanu is a blue chip player, it's clearly a position they value. I wouldn't be surprised. And look, there's even a scenario where they take him over Kayvon. I'm not saying they would. I think they would take Kayvon over Aquanu. But I really think that Jets fans should be maybe more open to the fact that he could be the pick. And look, if they don't, they've said this, and you have to take everything that GMs and assistant GMs and whatever say before the draft, because maybe it's just smoke, but they've said, obviously we like this edge class, but they don't have a headliner like in years past, referring to the Bosa brothers and Chase Young. And maybe that's just to try to drive Kayvon's value down so he'll fall to 4. But if they feel that way, and they feel that Aquanu is, who by the way is a perfect scheme fit. It's not just that he's a great tackle at a position, like he is a perfect fit in this offense to pair with, with Becton or George Fant or whatever. If they don't feel like there's a big gap between Kayvon and the other edges, look, maybe they do take Aquanu, and then at 10 they can go with Jermaine Johnson or George Karlaftis, or hell, look, let's say they trade for Deebo Samuel. They take Aquanu at 4, they trade for Deebo Samuel. And then at 35, and these are guys we haven't talked too much about, but Boye Mafe, Abikidi, I think one of those guys is going to be there at 35. And I don't mean to say that, Boye Mafe specifically, and it's purely based on the Senior Bowl, but he looked like a stud and a half. And if they feel that there's not a huge gap between Kayvon and Karlaftis and Jermaine Johnson and Walker, whatever, and they feel like there's a huge gap between what Aquanu can bring you, I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind. If they draft Aquanu, there's going to be a segment of Jets fans that'll be upset immediately. I would just say sit back and just see how they address the rest of the draft. Because if they walk out of there with Aquanu and they've traded for Deebo and they get Boye Mafe, I'm going to be really freaking happy, even though Aquanu might not be the sexiest pick. You mentioned Sauce Gardner. And look, I love Sauce Gardner. I called it back in January. I said he's cornerback number 1. It'd be a dream to take him at 10. Obviously, he's flown up the draft boards, and I would be happy with him at 4. I think my only question mark would be, would the Jets do it? I mean, everything they've said kind of the inverse of what we were just talking about. Everything they've said has been about the trenches, taking guys in the offensive line and the defensive line. Everything they've said has been that they don't really value corner. And not just everything they've said, everything they've done. I mean, corner was a way bigger need last year, and they waited till day 3 of the draft to pair somebody with their outside corner who was a day 3 pick himself, who had only started a few games at the end of last year. Like, I mean, that's how little they valued corner and trusted their guys to develop a corner. So I understand that Sauce might be a blue chip player. Daniel Jeremiah, who's Joe Douglas's close friend, had the Jets picking Sauce Gardner. Maybe that's something to note. I would be very happy if he's the pick, but it's more so not would I want him, but do I think the Jets would do it, which is more important. I'm not the GM. It's Joe Douglas. And if Joe Douglas's team, and like you said, the pressure is going to start to turn on, Joe Douglas is going to draft Joe Douglas's team. You could also make the argument that tackle might be in a better or might be in a worse spot than cornerback. And tackle is a more premium position. And the only reason I would say that is I think that with Becton's injury issues and with before last year, everybody thought, including the Jets, that George Fant was a bit of a jag or just a guy. They signed Morgan Moses. There's question marks at tackle. Whereas corner, it's like they did just sign DJ Reed. I thought Bryce Hall had a nice season. They like developing their young guys. It's like you could make the argument that corner, and it was an extremely productive group last year. Obviously, wasn't an amazing group, but Michael, I mean, you were talking about all season how the cornerback play has been much better than we expected. And part of it was the scheme and part of it was the coaching. So you could make the argument, hey, tackle's in a worse spot than corner, even if you might look at the corners and not know the guys like the tackles and invested the same capital that they've invested at tackle. I just think it's a fascinating discussion. But if it's on the board between Ekwonu and Sauce, I think they're going Ekwonu. If between Ekwonu and Walker, it really comes down to their valuation. Clearly the ceiling is there with Walker. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Michael. The only concern I would have with Kayvon Thibodeaux, and I think he would be a good scheme fit. I think putting him in a wide 9, having him rush from 5 tech, 9 tech, giving him, the ability to just capitalize on his natural athleticism and his burst and his get off is going to be great for him. But when it comes to rundowns, and specifically the Jets play this wide 9 front, but a lot of times they like to have one defensive end like Carl Lawson, split out at 7 tech or 9 tech, have that speed rusher outside of one offensive tackle. And then last year they had JFM play defensive end, and he was more of the bigger bodied, the Eric Armstead defensive end, who's supposed to be, he can hold up against the run. You can move him inside on third downs as a pass rusher. He gives you maybe a bit more size, versatility. He can contain the pocket. He can hold the edge. I think Trayvon Walker, like you said, his floor is definitely that he can come in, and I think you're confident in his ability to maintain the edge. And then it's just about developing his ceiling as a pass rusher. With Kayvon, if you watch his film, there are times where he does get blown back a little bit, especially in the run game. And there might be a concern if you're going to have Carl Lawson and Kayvon Thibodeaux, not to say that they're not violent edge rushers, but there may be more finesse speed guys. And we saw how bad the Jets were against the run last year. That could cost him. So, how do you see Trayvon Walker potentially be? I know some Jets fans might not be as excited if he's the pick over Kayvon. He's not as sexy of a name. He doesn't have the production. There's still some scars from Vernon Golston, who was, a workout warrior who, shot up the ranks and after the college season, the Jets take him and he massive bust. There's still some scars there, but I guess talk Jets fans into Trayvon Walker and I guess what he could bring to this defense immediately opposite Carl Lawson.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing I would say is the floor in terms of being okay with him, because obviously there's risk with this player who is going to be drafted very high relative to what his production was. So that's scary, but I think you should feel okay knowing that this guy he's not going to be bad. I have a really hard time seeing that just with the tools he has. I think he showed you he can set the edge. He's versatile. So that's a plus as well. And stunts are a big part of, like, being able to execute stunts doesn't make you a star pass rusher, because it's, a team oriented thing. It takes multiple guys to run it. It's not self-created. So it's not, a difference making trait, but it is important. Teams run it a lot. The Jets ran a lot of them last year. So it's something that he's good at with that as well. And that's just another thing where, crash down, use your explosiveness, take up space. And he also times them well, because it's not always as simple as just, crash down into the guard, let your tackle loop outside. You got to be able to kind of, sell your moves a little bit to get so you can catch the lineman off guard and really run it effectively. And he does have that. So I think he has traits to where this guy can play decent, average NFL defensive lineman football at the worst. And the potential is just, it's incredible. The 40 time he ran at his weight, I believe he had the best 40 time ever in terms of the history of the combine, for a guy who weighed at least 270. So the tools are off the charts. And I know, obviously, the Jets fans, there are Vernon Gholston scars. I wasn't watching at that point to have those scars, so maybe it's a little bit different for me. But there are examples of these guys
this
who
is
do
actually
work out sometimes.
this will be the first draft where the draft, if they just take like Kayvon, I think he was born December 2000. Michael, you'll be older than him, which is a weird thing to, I mean, last year that was for me. Elijah Moore and I are basically the exact same age. It's weird. I mean, just to say your fanship changes. That 2008 year, which was Vernon Gholston's rookie year, was like the first year that I really, knew what I was watching. It was, crying after losses and whatnot. But yeah, it is a weird thing to see their birthdays and be like, oh, this guy's an old prospect. And it's like, oh, wait a second, he's my age. Like,
yeah, it is really crazy. Like, Jermaine Johnson, this guy is ancient. Did he fight in World War II? And he's like 2 years older than me. Yeah. And it's like, it's pretty wild. Now all these guys are the same exact. Some of these guys coming in this year will be either the same age as us or younger. So very wild.
I'm just glad I'm not in the spot where because I've had a podcast in the Jets, and you're kind of in a similar situation. I had a podcast when I was like 15. So now we're starting to hit the age where it's like, all right, the old heads can kind of at least listen to us and not have to turn it off because of our squeaky voices. I mean, at least one of us.
I was definitely past that point by the time I started, so I didn't have to go.
You came in onto the scene with the beard already.
Phase,
you already had the beard at like 16.
Yeah.
Now, there's a fun hypothetical. If the Jets do trade for Deebo Samuel, let's say they do the Tyreek Hill package. They give up 35 and 38, and they swap thirds or whatever it is. They just do the exact same trade that they offer for Tyreek Hill. They're sitting at 10, and I think in that situation, they would probably be looking to trade down. But if they can't get a trade down, let's say Malik Willis was the guy that they were going to, they had a deal, whatever. Malik Willis goes and another quarterback goes, and all of a sudden no team wants to trade up to 10, and they have to take a guy at 10. Who are some of the favorite targets of yours at 10, assuming they draft wide receiver with Deebo Samuel, assuming they don't have 2 second-round picks? Obviously, some of it will depend on who they take at 4, but who are some of the targets at 10 that maybe we weren't considering, without Deebo Samuel, because we've been kind of penciling in this pick as a receiver?
Yeah, when we were running through the scenarios, like with the different Deebo trades that could happen, this is the most interesting pick because, if you lose those second, third round picks, you're penciled in at 4 and 10. Say you get your edge rusher at 4, Kayvon or Walker. And what do you do here at 10? It opens up a lot of possibilities that we're not talking about right now because of what you said. Like, we're looking at receiver, we're looking at edge rusher if they don't go edge at 4. But in this scenario, you get Kayvon at 4. You traded your later picks for Deebo. It opens up some possibilities here. And like you said, trading down, I think that's number one. But if you can't trade down, which is possible because, if we want to trade down so much because these prospects aren't great, why is someone going to want to come up?
Quarterback.
Of course, the quarterback is the big one. But if you can't get it, then, guys come into play that maybe we're not considering right now. Like, do you think about Devin Lloyd or a linebacker? Do you think about Jordan Davis, Tyler Linderbaum, Derek Stingley? Because obviously we're not Kyle Hamilton, if he's still there. Because obviously we're not taking an edge rusher. You're not taking a receiver. Most likely, I don't think you would go receiver after already getting Deebo. So there are options that come into play here that are new options that we're not considering. So what would you do in this scenario?
I think it's definitely the trade down. But in the scenario that I just laid out, like let's say Malik Willis gets picked at 6, and then Matt Corral or whoever the quarterback is in my eyes, I see the Saints as the team wanting to trade up just because the trade they made with the Eagles just to me screams gearing up for a trade up. Let's say the Seahawks take him at 9, huge surprise, which would be very on brand for the Seahawks to take a quarterback out of nowhere there. I guess it's not completely out of nowhere because Drew Lock's a starter right now, but if those 2 quarterbacks go and all of a sudden the Saints are like, all right, well, never mind. We don't want to trade up now. We'll just sit back and we'll take Sam Howell or whatever, Kenny Pickett or whatnot. Then I think if that happens, there's going to be good players that will fall. I think the temptation to take Kyle Hamilton will certainly arise. Obviously the positional value of safety is not great. I guess you did trade Jamal Adams, so you're kind of trading Jamal Adams and getting back Elijah Vera Tucker and Kyle Hamilton in that scenario. That's not the end of the world. If you believe Kyle Hamilton is a true unicorn, then I think you do it. I mean, I know he didn't have a great 40 time, but his relative athletic score was still super high. His film is still among the best of any of these prospects. We know that Robert Saleh values safeties. I've made this point 1,000 times in this podcast, but you look at the Bills, best defense in the league, where are they strong at? Linebacker and safety. So it is a valuable position. And the Jets are walking out of this weekend with Deebo Samuel, Kayvon Thibodeaux, and Kyle Hamilton. It's hard not to be happy. I think that's a possibility. It's also like, look, maybe a guy like Evan Neal falls, and then maybe you do consider him. And I know you don't love Evan Neal, but just best players available at 10, he might be up there. Or maybe they go with a Charles Cross, that they maybe would consider more of a guy we haven't considered. I think Hamilton would probably be the favorite. If he's not available, I think they look at the corners. I would imagine Sauce Gardner's probably gone. Maybe they take a Stingley, a Booth, a McDuffie. Devin Lloyd's hard, not to love. There's a lot of options they could go with here. But I think the thing that really screams out to me is, are any of these guys, outside of Kyle Hamilton, are any of these guys really big difference makers? I mean, obviously there's some good players that we just listed. Like I think Devin Lloyd's going to be great, but he's 24. And I don't think if the Jets don't take him at 10, I don't think Devin Lloyd's going to the late teens anyway. So I think there's not a huge talent difference between 10 and 35. So it's like, if they do trade 10, I think they're better suited to fill out the roster at 35 and 38, because I think in this class, especially, every draft class is a crapshoot and you're just trying to get as many lottery tickets as possible. But in this draft class, everybody's fairly even. It's the reason why we have no idea who's going to go top 3. It's just get as many lottery tickets as possible and hope that they hit. And it's like, I would rather just give up 10 and take the receiver, because it seems like that's what you were going to do anyways at 10. And you still leave 35 and 38 to hope that one of these good players does fall, especially with teams reaching for quarterbacks. I do think that there's a chance Nakobe Dean is there at 35, or Tyler Linderbaum, or Lewis Cine, or, somebody that we maybe aren't even talking about, maybe a McDuffie or a Booth. Somebody like that falls to 35. I think that's a good scenario, a good situation for the Jets to be. But to answer your question, they're sitting there at 10. If they keep it, my expectation would be they want to keep it to trade down, particularly to pick up a first next year. I think that's the main reason you would do that. If they have to keep it, I think Kyle Hamilton's probably the favorite there, unless a guy like Sauce Gardner is available.
I agree with you. I think Hamilton is the guy here.
And it's like, I know safety's not maybe the sexiest pick to some people, but you put Kyle Hamilton on the back end of that defense, especially with the way that offenses are going, vertical passing offenses, trying to throw downfield. You have a guy in Hamilton that, between him and Whitehead, I think you have one of the better safety duos in the league. It would certainly be exciting. I do expect, though, if they do trade for Deebo Samuel, I think they give up that pick. So then it's like, I assume you trade for Deebo Samuel and you take Kayvon Thibodeaux at 4. I don't think it changes too much from your targets at 35 and 38. Again, we'll talk a lot more about their targets at 35 and 38 on our next podcast, maybe 2 podcasts if they trade for Deebo, which will come out Friday morning, because we'll be talking about who they picked, and then we'll be looking ahead to day 2. We'll have a much better chance to we'll have a much better understanding of what the board would look like. And who the Jets can target. It's just too hard to predict right now who will be available at 35 and 38, but I would bet money that they're going to be guys that'll fall to that spot that you're not expecting. Here's my one caveat. They do pick 10, even if they trade for Deebo or they don't, the one guy that I absolutely would be very upset if they took is Trevor Penning. That's the one guy that it's just under no circumstance that I want to take him. And I know Connor Hughes was talking about him at the Senior Bowl. I was like, oh, this is a guy that Joe Douglas is going to love. He's nasty. He's athletic, whatever. I do not want Trevor Penning on the Jets. If they take him, I'm sure we'll rationalize it, but he's the one guy that going into the draft, it's like, I don't really see it. I think I see a raw guy who's old, who's throwing his defensive ends into his own quarterback. I just don't see it. He has a ton of penalties. I'm sure he's quote unquote nasty, but the tackle situation, of course, they need to add a tackle in this draft to give depth behind Fanton Becton, or maybe even a guy who's going to bump one of those guys out if they take Ekwonu. But Trevor Penning's not that guy. So as long as if they get Deebo, and I honestly won't really care who else they do. If they get Deebo and Kayvon, they could take whoever at 10. If they take Penning and they walk away with Penning, Kayvon, and Deebo, I'll still be happy. But I think they could take a Devin Lloyd. I'd be happy. They could take a Linderbaum. They could go a corner or Jordan Davis. They really open it up to go with whatever.
Yeah, I agree with you. And before we move on to the the scenario that they trade 10, one more guy I do want to talk about as a possibility at number 10 in this scenario, of course, where they already acquired Deebo, so receivers off the table. But Jordan Davis, I don't want to rule it out. He checks a lot of Joe Douglas boxes. I mean, best relative athletic score ever for defensive tackle, best or first best. It's up there. He had a perfect 10.
What
Team captain,
didn't Jonathan Marshall have like the 100th
second best. He
percentile?
was 9.99.
So we'd have 1 and 2.
Yeah, I mean, so we've seen that precedent with the defensive tackle athleticism. They need a Foley replacement. It's just not a pick I'd rule out in this scenario. I don't, if everything stays put, no Deebo, definitely don't see it. But in this scenario, I would keep it open.
Yeah, and that's the one thing just to circle back to a point we were talking about earlier with Trayvon Walker, because you mentioned Jonathan Marshall, they like to take athletes. This Jets coaching staff is really confident in their ability to develop players. And I think, I think they did prove it to an extent last year. I mean, obviously the results weren't all there, but I did think you saw a team that got better. And I think specifically the corners played a lot better. I think you saw some young players develop. And that's something you really haven't seen from the Jets since, like Rex Ryan. I mean, there haven't been many players that have developed under Todd Bowles or Adam Gase since I've been watching. Not that it didn't happen, but especially those late round guys, those mid round guys, or even the guys like Trayvon Walker, who were, who would be, obviously they have high floor, but you're drafting him for his ceiling, for what, for his relative athletic score, the fact that you think you can develop him into a premier pass rusher based off that athletic profile, a Myles Garrett level player. This Jets coaching staff is confident in their abilities, which I like. And I do think it does open them up to some players that other franchises might deem raw, maybe wouldn't have the confidence to take. I don't think you're going to see that with the Jets. They're going to draft fearlessly. So, maybe they do like a guy like Trayvon Walker if he's on the board. As I just said, Michael, I don't think, if they trade 10, which I think is the most likely scenario, it's kind of hard to predict who they could take at 35 and 38. So let's just move ahead to the last thing, our mock drafts. I mean, everybody does a mock draft. None of these really matter, but I guess, look, we've made a bunch of mock drafts. At one point we were like, all right, let's just go through and, list out these mock drafts and how would you grade them? And then I was like, all right, this is going to get a little convoluted. So Michael, I'll just ask you this. What is your ideal, realistic Jets mock draft?
Okay. So talking with, say, no Deebo, this is why I can't wait for draft season to be over. All these disclaimers, if they do this, if they do that. Can't wait for it to be over. We
can just talk about who's actually on the team. We can do more interviews.
Talk about who we got. It's certainty. Only a few more days, but let's enjoy the speculation a little bit more. Perfect draft starts with Kayvon at 4 for sure. And I'm not going to include trade downs in this because that's even more hypothetical. But just staying put, I think Kayvon at 4, 10. Got to go with my guy Drake London. I think there's stuff, there are traits I like about each receiver, but the guy who his name comes up and I feel the most confident about, it's got to be him. And Jameson Williams.
Can I pause you right there? How would you rank those receivers? Because this is our last time to really talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you rank the receiver options at 10? Because I agree with you. I think I was a little bit more behind on Drake London. I watched Joe Blewett's film review. I started to look into more to him, and really what my deciding thing for him was, like, if Zach Wilson could pick any of these receivers, I think he's taking Drake London. And I think the yak makes him a fit in this offense. But sorry, how would you rank the options at 10, assuming they don't go after Deebo?
Yeah, so I'll put Drake London number 1. I think he's the most plus skills. He's also the youngest, and so he has some upside there, and had the youngest breakout age, his best production, but just player wise, he's the most positive traits, I would say. So I'll put him number 1. Jameson Williams, the guy I was getting to, I think it's probably close between him and London, the two receivers I would like the most in that spot. But I don't think Gary Wilson and Chris Olave are that far off. I'd be happy with any of those 4 receivers. I waffle between those two. Who do I like more? I think Olave has sharper route running and better overall speed and athleticism, but Garrett Wilson, better yak, maybe more explosive potential in terms of his ability to catch the ball, make acrobatic catches, things like that. Not that Olave can't do it as well, but I think it's a more trademark ability for Wilson. My gut is telling me I like Olave more, to be honest. But I think they're really close. So I'll go 1 London, 2 Williams, 3 Olave, 4 Wilson. But I would be happy with any.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. I don't think I would change any of those rankings, and they're all close. Like if they take Garrett Wilson, I could really buy into that because I still like Garrett Wilson. Like I remember the beginning of this process going to watch some George Karlaftis and just seeing Garrett Wilson just pop off the screen. I mean, and I think the thing to consider is like, all right, if the Niners trade for 10, who do you think they would draft to be their Deebo replacement? And obviously, we're not Niners podcasters, but I kind of think Garrett Wilson might be their Deebo replacement because he's a sharp route runner. He has the athleticism and he brings you the yak. Whereas Drake London's going to bring you the yak, but he's going to bring it in a different way. Maybe they'd go London. But if you look at the prototype of receiver that San Francisco has really gone after, it really is those smaller, speedier guys, yak, separation, route running. And I think that's more Garrett Wilson than Drake London. But who knows? I mean, they did take like Jalen Hurd, so they did have a big body guy they drafted. So I'd agree with your rankings there. But I think all four of those guys are just so close together. They all kind of bring you a different skill set. And for the Jets, if they're all on the board, it really just comes down to what are you looking for? It's not really
Right,
who's the best
right.
player. It's like any of those guys that could be talked into. But to really know who I would really want for the Jets, I'd have to be in the meeting room with the coaches and be like, all right, what exactly are you looking to pair with Elijah Moore, Berrios, and Davis? What exactly do you think is going to help Zach Wilson? What exactly do you ask from for the scheme? Because I think those are kind of three different answers. Like to help Zach Wilson, you go get Drake London. It's as simple as that to me. But what do you want in the scheme? You probably want sharper route running. You want separation. Maybe you want more of a burner who can stretch the defense. That's probably more Jameson Williams or Chris Olave. And what pairs well with Elijah Moore and Corey Davis and Braxton Berrios. That's either London or Jameson. And then there's Garrett Wilson in there as well, who I think is kind of a blend of both, best of both worlds kind of guy. So I don't know. It really comes down to what exactly they prefer, but I think I would line up with you pretty well. And also in my ideal mock, I would say it's also, if they don't go after Deebo, it's probably Kayvon and Drake London. I guess give 35 and 38. We
Yeah.
haven't really done that too much.
Yeah, and quickly on the receivers, like I agree. For me, they're too close to where I'm going to react strongly to it because, like you said, it comes down to what they want. I don't know that because I don't work with the Jets, so you gotta trust that they're taking the player that they want. Doesn't mean they'll be right because, like we said at the beginning, these guys bust all the time. It's not a high hit rate. But in terms of choosing the player out of this bunch, I think the talent is close enough to where you trust that they're picking the guy that they think they need the most and is the best fit for their scheme. So, but I go with London personally. So, moving on to the second round, like you said, it gets hard to project at this point. But looking at guys who are projected there right now, I love Travis Jones from Connecticut. There's so much to like with him. I think he fits what they need to fill the Foley role, not necessarily in being the player that Foley was, because I think part of the reason Foley's not a Jet right now is because as good of a player as he was, not a perfect fit for this scheme. More of a space eater, two gapper, 3-4 defensive tackle. You need someone who could, play those rundowns and stop the run, but do it as an athlete, as a gap shooter, explode into gaps, read the play, contort back to the ball, less of a, play reading, hold your ground type of defensive tackle. And I think Jones can do that. Great run stuffer, but also a great explosive athlete. He's a team captain as well. I've been highlighting all the team captains. Douglas has shown a liking for those guys. And he's pass rush upside as well. So I think he could fill that one tech, two eye tech rundown role really well for them right off the bat. So I like Travis Jones, Jaquan Brisker. There's a lot of safety options in this part of the draft that bring different things, but Brisker, another great athlete, great leadership, team captain type of guy. And then third round gets really interesting. The linebacker class is hard to project. There are guys who are, like Chad Muma, for example. I remember seeing him in fourth round conversations a couple months ago. Now people talk about him in the second round. So I have no idea where these guys are going to go. But one guy I do like, underrated target, Troy Anderson from Montana State. Incredible athleticism score. Obviously played lesser competition, but great production, especially coverage production. So he's a guy to look out for. Also played under the Jets at the Senior Bowl and another team captain. So I would like to see a linebacker pick. So those are I guess that would be my ideal draft right now, I would say.
Speaking of linebacker, I think you raise a good point. I think this is definitely something the Jets are going to address. It is a deeper linebacker class, so while I think the dream for me is Nakobe Dean making it to 35, he's a guy that immediately I think is a starter for you, and he's an impact player. And he's only going to fall because of size concerns, but I really have no concerns about Nakobe Dean being a good NFL player. And the other reason is because I think there's a lot of those smaller will linebackers, those faster linebackers in this class. So maybe teams will ignore it and think that they can go get a guy like a Chad Muma, later in this draft. But I think one of the things we haven't really talked about is, what type of linebacker do you think the Jets are looking for? Because, obviously the two guys you listed are, great athletes, good in pass coverage. But when you look at the current linebacker room for the Jets, obviously they got CJ Mosley, who's a pencil in as a starter. I think he's probably your Mike, although it is important to note that at the beginning of the year, the Jets are going to have him be more of their strong side linebacker. And, he wasn't the Mike to start off the year. That was Draw Davis. So maybe they try to move him back there. Quincy Williams was a guy who really came on, and it seems the staff really likes him, but he seems more of a will linebacker, even though he's a great blitzer. He's the smaller body type. It just seems like he's more of a will, not doesn't have the play strength to be a strong side linebacker. The two guys that they drafted last year, Jamie and Sherwood and Hamza Nasruddin, didn't really see too much of either of them. And Sherwood's battling or coming back from a torn Achilles. So my question to you, Michael, is what type of linebacker do you think the Jets are looking for here? I mean, do you think they're going to try to go for more of the Mike linebacker to replace CJ Mosley, bump him out to Sam? Do you think they're going to be looking for the strong side linebacker they don't really have? Do they go to the pass rushing or to the pass coverage linebacker? I mean, when you look at this defense, what type of linebacker should Jets fans be expecting on days 2 and day 3 of the draft? Hell, maybe even day 1 if they go Devin Lloyd.
That's a really good topic, and I feel like it's one that we should be putting a lot more thought into. So after I sort of give my take on it, really curious to hear what you think as well. But it's a good point because CJ Mosley, his future is up in the air with this team. I think there's a good chance that he gets released after the season because of the cap space they could open up by releasing
I think restructure. If he's good, I think they'll restructure.
Yeah, there is that too. But again, it still adds to the murkiness of it. So do you look for more so that sort of linebacker who could play that Mike role, bigger guy, more of a leader, middle of the defense type of player? Do you keep looking for that mold they've been looking for, those smaller athletes? Because that's the thing. They have a lot of those guys right now. Quincy Williams, they have now 3 converted safeties in the room with the 2 they drafted last year, Nasruddin and Sherwood, and then now they just signed Marcel Harris, who was the 49ers' 3rd linebacker last year, playing some will for them in a rotational role. So they have plenty of those guys. They're not great prospects based on the production they've shown or where they were drafted, but they do have a lot of them. Whereas, big bodied thumpers, which you do still need, in that CJ Mosley starting Mike sort of role. Not everyone needs to be a super fast, small linebacker. He's really the only guy who fits that mold on the roster, I guess, unless you want to throw Delshon Phillips in there. So that is, they have less of those than the other archetype. But that other, the smaller will linebacker type, they got a lot of them, but none of these guys have proven that they're great yet. So you still could add there. So I could see either one. Which one do you think, if you had to choose one or the other, like with say a 3rd round pick, which route would you rather go?
Well, I think that they're going to look more. I don't think they're going to look strictly for the Sam linebacker. I think in today's NFL, you're looking for pass coverage. But like you said, they do have a lot of those smaller pass coverage linebackers. I think they're going to be looking for a Mike linebacker and a guy who can play will and can, play Sam. I think they're going to be looking for versatility is the key word. But yeah, I mean, look, solid found his Fred Warner. And obviously that transformed their defense. I think he kind of has his version of it in CJ Mosley, who had a great year in my eyes last year. But if they drafted a guy like Nakobe Dean, obviously he's the smaller linebacker. So you'd assume, okay, he's a will linebacker. But in my eyes, Nakobe Dean's a Mike linebacker. I mean, he plays like a goddamn bulldog. I mean, you can blitz him. He is very similar to Quincy Williams in the sense that, his play speed and you rush him and, he's just a blink of an eye. He's at the quarterback. But the thing that separates Nakobe Dean is his instincts, his play rec, and his ability to track the football and find it immediately. And I think that sometimes, you could see Quincy Williams get lost a little bit. Whereas Nakobe Dean, he looked like a 10-year NFL veteran on a college field. Even though he's small, and that might cause him to fall, that's a guy who can be a Mike linebacker in this league. And the size is the only thing that's going to hold him back. So I think if he's available at 35, I really do think they could take him because they could play him at will if they're worried about the size. But then they could also put him at Mike, bump Mosley to Sam, and you have a pretty nice 3 linebacker trio between him, Williams, and Mosley. So yeah, I don't think there's a specific archetype in mind, but I think the Mike linebacker is really kind of what they're going to be looking for. And yeah, the pass coverage in today's NFL is always going to be the emphasis. But, you look how bad the Jets were against the run. I think most of that is on the interior defensive line. But in this system, it really puts a lot of strain on the linebackers. I mean, they really have to, in this wide 9 front, linebackers have to fill those gaps. And I think the Jets got a little bullied inside at the linebacker position at times. And a guy like Dean, while he's small, he doesn't play small. And he's not a guy that I see getting bullied per se. He might get outmatched sometimes, but he's going to fight. He has a nose for the football. He's going to fight for it every down. So it's like, for me, I think they're going to be looking for tough, instinctual, physical linebackers. But yeah, you're always going to have pass coverage in the back of your mind. But yeah, like
question for you about Dean. Would you consider making a trade up into the low first for him if he slips like late 20s?
No, I mean, no, if the Jets are in love with him, that's one thing. But for me, like, I think he's a great player, but I think there's a good chance he makes it to 35. I really do. I just think, the way the NFL is going, I don't think there are many teams. We talked about this a lot. The beginning of the second round is so valuable, particularly because the end of the first round is all those contenders, all those teams who think they can win the Super Bowl. And a lot of them have a lot of money tied up. So this is their in some cases, their one opportunity to bolster their roster, and they draft for need. They draft for the guy that they think can put them over the top. And a lot of times a linebacker isn't that. A lot of times they're going to draft, okay, we got to bolster our offensive line, or we got to go get our quarterback a big weapon, or, something like that. And it's like, so that causes good players to fall. And also they need guys who they're confident can be immediate contributors. And so, a guy like Dean, I think some teams will have concerns over his size and say, okay, he's going to need time to adjust and whatnot. I don't have those same concerns. I actually think Dean's going to come in and be pretty good off the bat. But I think he'll fall to 35. And the other reason you don't trade up for him is because, like you said, this linebacker class, there's a lot of good line. It's a deep linebacker class. I love Devin Lloyd. He's probably at the top. Dean's probably number 2. But then after that, I mean, there are a lot of similarly rated linebackers with high athletic scores. So I think Dean will fall because of that. I think teams who are picking at the end of the first will say, look, we can go get a Chad Muma in round 2 or round 3. Let's go and bolster offensive line or get a pass rush or whatever that we think is going to put us over the top. For me, the targets for Dean, I think, could be at the top of the second. But with Detroit's need at safety and how the safety the board falls pretty well for safety at the top of round 2, I think they'll burn that pick on a safety. So, for me, the ideal targets, like we talked about, Kayvon at 4, Jake London at 10 if they don't go Deebo. I think 35 and 38 for me, it's like if they could get Nakobe Dean and then pair him with a Jaquan Brisker or a Lewis Cine, I'm extremely happy. Obviously, I like Travis Jones, but I think, I think Jones could make it to round 3. I think Perry and Winfrey could make it to round 3. I think there's a lot of flexibility here for the Jets. Really quickly before we get out of here, does any of this change? Because that was our dream scenario, assuming they don't get Deebo. Let's say they get Deebo at 10. Does anything change, or is it pretty much the exact same?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty similar because, like we said, I think the plan is receiver at 10 anyway. So in terms of the needs, I don't think there's a big change if they're able to swing 10 for him. But like we said earlier, if they do somehow get him with a late round package, then there's a lot of possibilities with trade downs or an outside the box pick at 10. But 10 for Deebo straight up, I think you're just kind of sticking with the plan right now of using that pick on a wide receiver.
What if the pick at 4 isn't Kayvon? Let's say the pick is Ekwonu or Sauce.
I think at that point, that makes it really interesting. Then I think edge becomes a huge priority with that.
I like those guys.
Those second round picks. Yeah, like you said, there's a lot of depth at this position. As much as we love these prospects up top, and it definitely is the best case scenario. But if they don't, for whatever reason, get a guy out there, like this scenario, you can feel good about your Maffe's, Ebiketti's, players like that down here at this part of the draft.
Don't you just love it when you get an Adam Schefter tweet notification? You're like, Deebo, and then it's like Bears wide receiver Byron Pringle is arrested.
Listen to my podcast.
Yeah, or that, or listen to my podcast. It's just like, all right. Or like the Jets signed Vinny Curry. Like, I love Vinny Curry, but it's like, all right, that's not the Jets news I was necessarily hoping to see. Sorry, that was just a quick sidebar. But All right, Michael, I think this is probably it. I mean, you've been saying that you think the Deebo news could come on Monday. Look, I'll say this: if he's traded, I think he's a Jet. If he's not, I think the only way he's not a Jet is I think is if they don't trade him. The Jets just make too much sense. Like the Packers have interest. You really think the 49ers are going to trade him
Right. Right.
a team that they're going to probably face in the playoffs to Aaron Rodgers, to LaFleur, who reportedly has some kind of beef with Shanahan. If you watch that post game handshake last season, it kind of came off that way a little bit. So I think if he's traded, he's a Jet. If he's not a Jet, he's a 49er. That's just how I look at it.
It does seem that way. It's like, obviously we're biased, but like it's hard to argue that anyone else is a favorite.
Who else has the capital and the money to do so? I mean, the Jets are one of the few teams that have really positioned themselves well to take on a big salary right now.
At least among the teams that are mentioned, like you said, Green Bay, don't see it. They're a rival. And then Detroit, the Jets have that 10th pick there. And the Lions can't really rival that if the Niners are looking for a first round pick. Obviously, the Lions have 2, but we assume that's out of the equation. So it's tough to see a real competitor.
Yeah, would you give up 4 for Deebo? No, I know this is like an absurd question, and I don't see that ever happening. But let's say the Jets trade for Deebo, but they give up 4. How would you feel?
Like, my first reaction is that, like, I can't be mad. Man,
if there was a Jamar Chase in this draft, a lot of people would say the Jets would draft him at 4, right? So it's like it's not like receiver should be out of the question at 4.
But you still have the 10th pick, so it's not like you're sacrificing the ability to make a top 10 pick. My brain says that is absurd. My heart says just give me Deebo right now.
Because 10 compared to all the receiver packages we've seen recently, from Devontae Adams to even go back a few years to DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, like if you look at all the receiver trade packages, Amari Cooper. I mean, you pointed this out to me. I'm trying to remember the other ones. Why can I not think of other receiver? Anyways,
Hill,
none of them. The obvious one. Hill, Cooks. None of them hit 10. So that's already, you could argue the Jets are quote unquote overpaying. I mean, I don't think that's the case, but like those other guys were not getting the 10th overall pick. So I agree with you.
Right. And I do think like at 10, you're, like we said, we're planning to take a receiver anyway, so it doesn't feel like a huge loss. But then at 4, it's like, Thibodeaux, Gardner, Ekwonu. This is where you're really missing. It feels like you'd be missing out on someone. 4 would be a little bit. I wouldn't be mad. Like they'd have Deebo Samuel. I wouldn't. Every time he makes a play, like, oh, could have the 4th pick instead of him. So I wouldn't be mad. But that's being objectively trying to take the heart out of it. That's an overpay. But 10, let's go for it.
All right. So maybe we'll have another podcast before the draft talking about Deebo Samuel. Maybe we won't. Regardless, thank God it's almost draft season is over and the draft is almost here. I mean, I'm so sick of talking about these prospects. So we appreciate you guys listening to our episodes the last few months. Very excited to drop 4 next week, maybe 5, or this week. I mean, so you can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter. Michael_Nania, myself at Ben W. Blessington. Go to jetsxfactor.com for the best place to go for Jets content, especially this week. Jets X Factor guys are going to have a lot coming your way. So yeah, Michael, I guess that's it. Any last thoughts before we get to the NFL draft / potential Deebo Samuel podcast? Let's just say NFL draft. Let's not jinx it. Deebo's still, hypothetical. Any last thoughts?
I don't know. Maybe we should go the reverse route, because I was thinking, like with Tyreek Hill, I wasn't watching any highlights. I was saying I'm not going to get excited just in case, and they didn't trade for him. So maybe the football gods sort of took that as a sign of disrespect towards his game. So maybe this time around, it's like, watch more Deebo highlights, show them that we expect him, that we want him.
Manifest.
And I've already been doing that. I mean, you and I watched a 10-minute film review of him before we started recording.
Yeah, we're gonna watch another one after this podcast. Don't you worry.
So I'm already invested into this plan. I'm trying to do the reverse. Let's actually manifest it, like you said.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Have a great week. We'll see what happens on the receiver front, but regardless, it's going to be an exciting week for the Jets. This team is going to get a whole lot better. So stay tuned. We'll be back later this week.